Attorney Mike Maddux.
Hey, good afternoon. It's a delight to be here.
Oh, I'm glad to see you again. So you are somebody that I trust. I don't really trust a lot of other attorneys, but you are somebody that I trust when there is a civil rights violation, or if, a police officer has gotten out of hand and there's been a terrible injury. You're somebody that I implicitly trust to send those cases to. It's not a field that I really practice in heavily, but it is something that that for you is second nature. How did you even get involved in that?
Well, first, thank you for your trust. It's an honor to be able to do those cases because they're very challenging cases. As I always like to kind of joke, but not really, there's a reason why you can drive down the interstate and not see a sign that says, if the police beat you up, call me.
Right.
The cases are very challenging, but they're so important because it's a form of social justice. Really, it's a love that I developed kind of out of my criminal practice because when I started on my own over 25 years ago, it was about, okay, I'm going to do what I know. I was a prosecutor. Now I'm going to become a defense attorney. And eventually I started seeing the signs of injustice where it wasn't just enough to get a case dismissed. Maybe somebody had been injured inappropriately, or their rights had just been abused to a point where it wasn't enough to get a suppression motion granted. And as I evolved my practice and started to do some personal injury, I realized the perfect blend of criminal and personal injury is doing civil rights litigation, because a lot of times people have physical injuries that need medical treatment, and it stems from a violation of the Constitution. And I love trying to apply the Constitution and see that what it's meant to be about is followed.
So I'm sure that a lot of the people that you're representing are people, I mean, they landed in jail.
Yes.
So they're people that might be difficult for anybody to empathize with. When you say it's a difficult field, is that part of it, or?
I think that from the outside looking in, that can be true, but I personally have a great level of compassion for people that have been in a situation with the police. And sometimes people ask me, well, it's because you have a beef with the police. And absolutely not. My father was in law enforcement for 28 years.
Oh, wow.
I actually respect them immensely and actually do believe they have extremely difficult jobs. What I don't like is when the training protocols or the attitudes of culture in certain agencies sort of metastasize into an unauthorized privilege to abuse people. If your job is that hard and that taxing, take a break. I do from my own. Get some counseling. I think counseling's a good thing. I love my life coach, and I encourage people to use the resources, and I think police have those resources. Some of the challenges, the ego that can be involved in it, the training matrix, stay one step ahead of other people. For me, when I see a police officer that can de-escalate somebody with their compassion, their kindness, their listening skills, that's an A+ officer, because they don't have to use force and they don't have to use bullying to gain leverage. They use it with just basic human skills.
So in a sense, if you're sort of the policeman of the policeman, in a sense, because people don't say, oh, don't, be careful in the supermarket, be careful here, be careful in my practice, be careful as a police officer, because they say, because we may get sued. So in a sense, but if the police officers and their agencies have a higher standard and they engage in this behavior less, their reputation is better with the community, the trust is better in the community. So in a way, it can be a service if you can think about it like that. I kind of think about it like that. As long as the cases aren't frivolous and you don't really deal with anything that's frivolous. You have some pretty, in fact, crazy stories. Like, give me some of the more extreme, a couple of examples, if you will, of some of the fact patterns that are kind of crazy.
Sure. Well, to start off with, I'd like to say that teaching young people how to interact with the police safely has been something I've been very involved with, particularly in any inner city groups. Mm-hmm. So I've worked with Tampa Urban Young Life, and we've had sessions where we talk about how to work with the police and how to handle a traffic stop or an encounter, because it can be very frightening.
Oh, yeah.
If my blood pressure is going up, I can only imagine how just the Joe Publics blood pressure is going up, and how they can de-escalate the police through their interactions. And I've actually seen people get bitter. Well, why do I have to de-escalate them? They're there to serve me. They're there to protect. And I see that attitude sometimes, and I try to just resituate people, get them to respect the difficulty of their jobs, and then help them perform it more easily. And then if there are violations going on, call up a lawyer, file an internal affairs complaint, but don't try to litigate with your mouth and your actions at the side of the road. Now, you asked what are some of the more interesting cases. Over the years, I've definitely done a lot of cases involving police canine dogs. I had one against St. Pete PD where they used the dog to track juveniles that were checking car handles, and basically decided they were committing auto burglaries. And when they ran, they released the dog, and my client's leg was torn up by the dog. And because those cases are hard and qualified immunity applies, we've heard a lot about that in the news, the officers actually won under qualified immunity. And it was found to be reasonable because he ran and he didn't recognize the juvenile's age. So what I've learned is that over the years, it can be very hard to identify a winning case. It's not hard to identify injustice. Most of the cases I've lost had an injustice, but sometimes the law is designed to protect the police. Once heard a story from a seminar, a very good civil rights litigator in Nashville went to the seminar, and he was speaking with, sort of the reciprocal side of the police defense attorneys. And they stood up and said, we win 95% of our cases. He stood up after and said, you lose 5% with all the laws you have in your favor. You must not be very good, because everything's in your favor. They get an early opportunity to contest losses through interlocutory appellate rights in federal court. But at the end of the day, I'm not complaining. I'm just observing the cases are hard. And probably 15 years ago, I wrote an article that still unfortunately stands, and it is that not every injustice is going to get a remedy.
And that's absolutely true in the law. In America, I think most people expect that every injustice will be remedied. It's just not that way. But at least if people know that there is the potential to be held accountable for their actions, hopefully they react differently. And hopefully the agencies will help out. And I think it's key what you said about training and about how being a police officer is such a difficult job. People don't understand. I know one of the notes that I had was about prison or correctional officers. I think they live in a different world than we, other than TV, than we really realized. But there are some crazy things that happen there. Was it that you had a case where one correctional officer didn't like an inmate, made sure that another inmate had a pipe to beat them? I mean, that's crazy to us who are on the outside.
It's crazy. There's a whole culture in custody of violence by inmates on inmates, gangs, and then fights between the detention officials who are woefully underpaid for the type of services they have to engage in the environment they're in. Now, but what I will say, two more interesting cases. The one you mentioned where they were tired of my client knew they thought had a big mouth, and they basically got another inmate to literally almost beat him to death. Another case that was very troubling involving mental illness. My client was in the Pasco County Jail in a mental holding cell, and clearly was not in his right state of mind. They insisted on their right to check his cell, even though it was clear he was naked. There was nothing going on. He had served our country in the Army. And when they told him he needed to cuff up through the food chute, imagine sticking his hands through like a mailbox like slot in this large metal door. And he refused and said, if you want some of me, you can come in here, and not say nice words. And they decided they were going to send a lot of people in there. But before they did that, they wanted to disable him. They stuck a percussive device, a rifle, with a less than lethal munition in it, which translated means something that is not designed to fire a projectile per se, but to create a flashbang. So it would be a very violent noise that would temporarily make him deaf and disorient him, and they could go jump on it. Now think about this. He's in a cell. He's not going anywhere. He's not about to run away. They have to open the door to even go in there. He's not outside the cell and they have to put him in. He's inside his cell. So on video, thank God, video saves a lot of cases that would otherwise be unrebuttable. They stuck that through the rifle holding the less than lethal munition and pulled the trigger while he's about a foot away, and they forgot that it has a percussive blast and put a hole almost down to his femur in his thigh.
Oh my gosh.
And
so
he went scrambling to his cot, face down, screaming in pain, searing
his flesh had been blown off to his bone.
Almost to his bone. It could have killed him.
Could have killed him
if it had gone to his femoral artery. And here he's mentally ill, and this is what they did. And we did settle that case. And thanks to lawyers like you who send me cases, it was from a referral. And, you know, that's what I enjoy, is the camaraderie of working with other attorneys that see the need for a cleanup job after they've done the first round of cleanup. And it's hard because, you know, if you have a case, I have a client right now, he's saying, well, we have to tell them we're going to sue them. We have to get started. I'm like, you still have pending criminal case. You have to be patient and wait, because if you stoke the fire with a civil threat, they're going to double down. So we have to get you out of harm's way and keep your liberty safe. Then we can look at what the damages may or may not be when we get you into a safe spot.
I'm sure. And I hear it at work. You know, people will call and they'll say, my loved one has medicine that they need and they're not being given medicine in jail. And we all think that people need to be confined when they're, you know, when they've broken the law. But by the same token, we don't want to be, Russia or Cuba or, that's a dictatorial place. We want to at least give people the medical care that they deserve, right? So you listen to these stories, and then some of them more brutal, and you think, so how does this happen? And you kind of touched on it before. What a difficult job being a law enforcement officer is, or even a correctional officer. I don't think people who decide that they want to be a law enforcement officer grew up thinking, I think when I grow up, I want to be a police officer and beat people's asses. I think that they have some other more honorable, intention.
Absolutely.
And that somewhere along the way, things happen to them. That they deal with situations, either out of, they certainly have a right to fear for their own harm, but I mean, that lead them to see things out of kilter or react out of kilter, or if it's a power trip. A lot of that can be addressed by something that the agencies can do, can't it? What can our government or our agencies do, not only to lessen these sort of events, but to help the police officers so they're not even involved in those? Like, what can they do?
I think there's a number of things. First of all, the key thing is crisis intervention training, because there are so many mental health calls now on the street, and crisis intervention emphasizes a different mode of engagement. It's less about tactics designed to show force and awe, and it's more about tactics to show human connection. So you give more time and space to people, you don't crowd into them. And CIT is becoming more and more mandatory, but it's about de-escalating, and it's about the role that law enforcement plays as a guardian angel, not just a suspect finder and arresting person, but a guardian angel. And we need those guardian angels out there. And I do think it's hard to keep that perspective when your life could be threatened at any moment. One of my good friends is in law enforcement, a neighbor, and he told the story of, working with some juveniles and older people that kept coming to a convenience store and were told many times to leave. And they were there every hour, and finally said, we're going to pat you down and take you for trespassing. And he said they left the youngest looking one without any surveillance and supervision while they patted down the adults who were clearly more threatening. And they found a loaded 9mm in the juvenile's cargo pants. And they're like, that we could have been dead if he wanted to shoot us. And we left him as non-dangerous. So that codes them to think everything's dangerous. Mm-hmm. And so the coding is necessary in a way for them to stay safe, but it also can be a trigger that we get shootings. I mean, I have a shooting right now where the person, answered the door with a firearm and they got shot, and they were not pointing the gun at anyone. And that case has just happened, I think, up in the Panhandle with Fort Walton in Florida. So I think a lot of it is about keeping their mental health fresh. What I said earlier, taking breaks, owning that they might need a reassignment. I've always been a big fan of saying nobody needs to be in Ybor City probably more than 6 months, because dealing with the tension in Ybor City, the partiers, the crowds, it's so much stress. We don't leave our soldiers in active war zones for more than a year because they're going to start making mistakes from the pressure and the constant threats. And so we get them out and let them refresh. So I think refreshing, I think training. And then I just think a lot of it is reminding yourself of why you're in it. I think as a lawyer, I have to remind myself sometimes of why I'm in it. And it comes back to compassion, serving, loving people, caring about people. And one of the biggest points of pride I've had in my whole career is that one of my paralegals, she was in the Army. She kind of did it to get out of a bad Miami culture where she probably would have been going to jail or prison. Did well in the Army, and then became my paralegal at some point and wanted to be the first person in her family to get a college degree. And she did. And she did it while she was working for me. And then she got her life dream fulfilled when the Tampa Police Department lessened their tattoo policy because she has some tattoos and wouldn't let people with tattoos get into law enforcement.
I didn't know that.
Yes, it was that strict.
Well, the culture's definitely changed about that.
Definitely changed, but she got sponsored, was one of the top cadets in her class, and she's been on the streets in Tampa now for about 4 years. And it's a pride and joy to know she's out there serving after she's seen some of the civil rights cases. So she has a particular mindset of knowing how to de-escalate things, also how to be very strong presence and firm. I miss her on a lot of my cases.
I'm sure.
But I've had heard the stories of her success on the streets, and it just makes my heart really proud. And so, to have her be out there is just a testament to hard work pays, her hard work, and then listening and learning. And we just need officers that are willing to be a lot like her and commit to service. And I believe that probably 99% of law enforcement has that. They just may be given some bad sets of circumstances. And I'm interested in never doing another civil rights case in my career, if possible. That would mean society is, operating at an all-time high.
And the de-escalation, if they're taught these, and I something you said really hit me, because so many people who have mental health problems on the street. I mean, all you have to do is stop at a stoplight at some of our bigger intersections and see people who, not all the people, but a substantial amount of people who have mental health problems. And you're a police officer, maybe you're just starting out, you're in your 20s, you haven't figured out your own mental health. Imagine to deal with somebody that is, these are complex people. I don't know how much training they get they're not psychologists or psychiatrists. But the de-escalation can not only make it safer for the person, but it can make it safer for them. So I would think it would be very important at some point for our agencies to try to educate them or try to prepare them. Maybe not educate, but prepare them.
Yes.
And I don't know, do they have any preparation really?
They do. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office has crisis intervention training. It's a 40-hour unit. As far as I know, every deputy has to have it now. And they've done a lot to train other sister agencies like TPD.
So that's 40 hours. That's 1 week.
It's a week, but it's a start.
Yeah.
And I think that they are working on doing more and more. One of my dreams would be to actually serve law enforcement and consulting over some of the stories that I've seen and sharing what I thought were ways to, look at it. Not so much Monday morning quarterback, because we can all do that, but just to say, okay, what are the lessons? One of the proudest moments I had was a case involving the Oviedo Police Department and a suicide where they had just lost control of the scene. and had really berated somebody that was having a lot of mental health problems, and then lost track of her. And she sadly went into her home while they were shaking down her boyfriend in the front for driving without a license, suspended.
Having one license.
She went out the back and took a shotgun and shot herself in the shoulder with it. And while she was bleeding out, the cops were more worried about what her boyfriend was doing, trying to get her help and trying to throw him on the ground. And that's just a priority problem. And we ended up settling that case. But one of the things that we did that I was just so thankful about is they agreed to allow a California state trooper. We solicited him. He was known as the Angel of the Golden Gate, and he had talked to over 100 people out of suicide off of the Golden Gate Bridge. And so he has this personality, a magnetic personality, where he can capture somebody contemplating suicide, connect with them, and get them to step back. And he did training for them about how to be more aware of mental health challenges, suicide prevention, and then they had to record it and play it for the new cadets. That was a complete win. Justice for the family, and then a protocol where we learn. And I'll be frank, meaning a lot of times law enforcement agencies don't want to have anything to do with us suggesting how they could do it different. They're literally hostile to that.
Wow.
You're not going to tell us how to operate. You're not going to.
Sort of like a pride thing, or is it they think we're going to divert funds from things that they think are more necessary? Where does that come from?
It's a combination of things. I think that ones that you just mentioned, I think it's a failure to be able to see win-win in a situation where they just see that they're being, criticized. And really, I'm trying not to make it criticism as much as, let's learn from this painful experience. I'm a big believer in win-win, and meaning like we can find something positive from this tragedy. And there are times when law enforcement just isn't interested. Just like one of my pet peeves in doing all these cases is it's okay to apologize. Everyone needs to know an apology is not an admission of liability. If you are putting on your human side and showing compassion and telling a mother that you're so sorry that her son just got gunned down in her bedroom because he threatened your officers, you have to be able to say sorry, not walk away from that and never say anything. I think our leaders owe it to, because anytime somebody dies, whether it's justified or not, it's a tragedy. Okay, because the police aren't here to take life. They're to protect it. And even if it's 100% justified, I think we're sorry for your loss. And some basic compassion would be a real winner for law enforcement to rebuild the negativity they've gotten, a lot of it unjustifiably.
The bravado, there's just that whole bravado. Everybody loves Grady Judd, and it makes people feel safer because when you know that bad guys are being collected off the street, it makes you feel safer. So it's sort of appeals to that part of us. But a lot of other professions, physicians, when there's a malpractice case, are taught that, after this is over, even if they did nothing wrong, it's okay to say, I'm sorry that this happened. Yes. I'm sure that no police officer who ever made an error that led to somebody's death, unless he's a, sociopath himself, I'm sure that has been a mark or something difficult, a tragedy for that person.
Soul scar.
Absolutely, a soul scar. Oh, yes, a soul scar. So I'm sure that in some way that might be healing even to the police officer. And certainly, just talking to clients about what's reasonable and what's not reasonable, people become so angry because they feel that nobody cared, yes, that they can't listen to what a case is worth or what is a reasonable settlement or what's a reasonable outcome because they're so driven by fury. And I'm not saying that an apology will take all the fury away, but it can take the edge off of hate.
Absolutely. And rebuild the injured community. I'm a big believer in rebuilding. I don't like to burn bridges with people. Sometimes as a criminal defense attorney, you end up burning a bridge.
Oh, yeah.
But I always believe in going for a communal resolution up front, and then you can always burn your bridges at the end if that's the only way to, advocate. But advocacy can involve humility, and it can involve better listening. It doesn't always have to be,
No,
I'm going
it
to
does
advocate by you doing what I say.
No, and that oftentimes is not a great strategy. So you have to decompress when you come home because you have a wonderful family. Yes. Tell me a little bit about that wonderful family and how you move from one world into the other.
Well, I do have a wonderful family. My wife and I have been married 7 years, and we met 12 years ago with a great story. We met because of court. I was permanently recused out of the VOP division and for filing a motion against the judge, and he got mad at me and said, well, you're not coming back here anymore. I'm recusing myself from you. And I was really concerned my business was going to get...
You basically said, I can't be fair when I see your face.
Like,
wow.
I'm granting your motion, and by the way, I'm recusing, and pointed his finger at me and myself from all of your cases. And I was gone.
Might have been a service to your clients, but still.
Well, it was. Ironically, you perceived that early because while I thought I would never get another VOP case, remember the Constitution says you can pick your lawyer. And so with a permanent recusal, every time I was hired, I was back into the regular division. And for 2 years, my business involving violations of probation went through the ceiling. And in fact,
never know, man.
Women at the jail were calling me saying, I want to get out of that division, and would hire me just to get out. And so one day, one of my good friends, Jose Barrero, brought me a case and said, my client wants to get out. She's going to hire you because she's being threatened with a lot of time and wants to try her chances in a different judge. And at the end, he asked me, by the way, if you're single, my wife has a really nice girlfriend. She's trying to set up with somebody, and I don't really like doing this, but I'll do it. And I said, I am. And I went on a date with my wife the next Saturday, and we've been together ever since.
Oh, that's awesome.
So fast forward 2 years, and the chief judge, I think, was tired of the foolishness and said, you know, you kind of need to make up with Mike Maddux. And so I went in and had one of the best days I've ever had. My wife came in. She wasn't my wife then, but we were dating. And I told the judge, he said, what are we doing? I said, I don't know. What are we doing? And I approached the bench and I told him, you know, you hurt my feelings when you filed that because I didn't deserve it. I did my job, and then you were not happy. And I said, but thanks to you, I met my wife. And he's like, well, don't blame me for that, in a very funny, and I knew it would be all right, and came back and we showed.
Well, that's honestly a testimony to sort of, you know, an admission, or not an apology, but sort of an admission of, you know.
It was a healing. It was delightful to be back in front of him, and I really appreciated that opportunity. And so she and I have been together. I have two wonderful stepkids that I call my own kids. One's in college, one's about to graduate and go to Belmont College.
Oh, wow.
And so we're excited. And then
it's going to be a change.
It's a huge change. One of the most exciting things, though, that happened to me from building my family was we decided we were going to adopt. And it's a long process that has a home study and some training and, you know, working with different agencies. Well, we were very blessed by the Lord because we got a call way early in the process about what they call a stork drop baby, which is a baby that hasn't been assigned to any potential adoption couple because nobody knew she was going to be given up. And she was born in Tallahassee. That's where both my wife and I went to college. And it's ironic, the very weekend before we were called about her, we were just telling ourselves, you know, we've never been to Tallahassee together. We should go visit our alma mater. We were there at different times and not at the same time. And literally the Sunday night we said that, the Monday the phone rang and said, our adoption consultant said, there's a baby that's been born in Tallahassee.
Wasn't fortuitous.
And you need to go. And on Wednesday we had Micah. She was 6 days old.
Oh.
And she's just one of the most important things in my life. And I encourage everyone to consider adoption. You know, there's over 3,000 kids in foster care in Hillsborough County alone. You know, there's great things like Isaiah House 117. They're building a house out in Brandon where kids that are placed in shelter can have a good entry experience into foster care because so often there isn't a bed for them. They're spending the night at a DCF shelter or they're in a temporary placement. So there are a lot of good resources out there trying to help, but the biggest resource that needs to help is families. that
yeah.
are willing to adopt or willing to foster and just share love. Love is free. And there's just so many great things that you can do by adoption or fostering a child. And, you know, I don't know, I just found that loving our children is not a hard thing to do. And it's, like I said, free, and there's just so much need. My wife and I are just so pleased that we have Micah in our family. And because of Micah, I'm pretty sure my brother was inspired and he adopted his second child.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So once you get into the adoption culture, you realize how many people have adopted children and how special it is.
Had a friend growing up who was adopted, and she said, well, you just came, but they picked me.
That's very special.
And
yes.
that was the way she thought about it.
Yes.
And it can be a very, very beautiful thing. Well, I'm so happy for you, and I'm so glad that we got a chance to sit down and talk.
Me too.
And now I guess I got to let you go because you got to be at a depot.
Yes.
I was keeping track of the time. You have to be at depositions.
It's a real blessing to be with you. Thanks, Nadine.
Good to see
All
you.
right.